The wind howled through the park like a wounded animal. Snowflakes danced under the dim orange glow of the streetlights, falling softly on the worn-out bench where a young woman sat, clutching a small bundle to her chest. Her name was Elena, 24, fragile yet fierce in her quiet determination. Her cheeks were red and raw, lips trembling as she whispered softly to the baby in her arms. "Shh. It's okay, Liam. Mommy's right here," she murmured, her voice cracking from cold and exhaustion. The baby whimpered, tiny fingers clutching the edge of her torn scarf. His face was pale, his breaths shallow, little puffs of vapor escaping into the icy night. Elena pulled her thin coat tighter around him, ignoring her own shivering. Her shoes were soaked, her toes numb. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning, but hunger wasn't what hurt the most. It was the feeling of being invisible. All around, the world kept moving. Cars sped by the park. A couple laughed as they hurried home, their scarves fluttering behind them. Nobody stopped. Nobody noticed the young mother sitting on a bench in the middle of the freezing night. Just 3 months ago, things were different. Elena had a small apartment on the east side of the city. She worked at a local cafe, smiled at customers, and dreamed of saving enough to start nursing school. But life, unpredictable and merciless, had other plans. Her husband, Ethan, died in a construction accident when she was 6 months pregnant. The insurance claim got stuck in legal red tape. Bills piled up. When her maternity leave ended, her job wasn't waiting for her anymore. The landlord was kind for a while. Then the eviction notice came. Since then, every night had been a battle. One she fought not for herself, but for the little heartbeat she held against her chest. Elena looked down at Liam, his eyelids fluttering as he whimpered again. Her heart twisted. "I know, baby. I know it's cold. Mommy's trying, okay? Mommy's trying." Tears welled in her eyes, but they froze before they could fall. She stood up, pacing slowly to keep the blood moving through her legs. The park fountain nearby was frozen solid, the benches glistening with frost. Somewhere in the distance, church bells chimed 9 o'clock. She had nowhere to go. The shelter was full. She'd tried earlier, but they said no more beds for mothers tonight. The lady at the counter had given her a blanket, thin and worn. Now that blanket was wrapped around Liam. She tried to hum, the same lullaby Ethan used to sing when they were happy. But her voice faltered, lost in the sound of the wind. Then a whisper of despair crossed her mind. What if we don't make it through tonight? She immediately shook her head, clutching Liam closer. "No, don't think like that. You'll be okay. We'll be okay," but deep down her hope was fading. Her fingers had lost feeling. Her breath came out ragged and fatigue was sinking in. Her world was turning blurry, half from tears, half from hunger. Still, she smiled weakly at her son. "I'll keep you safe," she whispered. "No matter what." The streetlight above flickered. A snowflake landed on Liam's nose. He made a soft sound, and she giggled faintly despite her exhaustion. For that brief moment, in the middle of her despair, she remembered love. The love that kept her alive. The love that made her stronger than she ever thought she could be. And then, she heard footsteps, firm, steady, approaching through the crunch of snow. She turned her head slightly, heart pounding. Was someone coming? Was it danger? Or perhaps fate taking its first step toward her? The figure stopped a few feet away. A man in a long coat holding a briefcase, staring at her with quiet shock in his eyes. That's when their worlds first collided. The moment that would change both of their lives forever. The footsteps grew louder, steady against the crunching snow. Elena's heart raced. She clutched Liam tighter and turned her face away, afraid of what the stranger might want. The man stopped a few steps from the bench. Under the flickering streetlight stood a tall figure in a long gray coat, his dark hair dusted with snow. He looked like he'd come straight from a world far removed from hers. Polished shoes, leather gloves, and eyes that spoke of exhaustion, but also of something else, compassion. "Are you all right, miss?" the man asked, his voice calm but edged with concern. Elena hesitated. "I'm fine," she said quickly, though her voice trembled with the cold. She tried to turn away, shielding Liam with her arms. The man didn't move closer right away. Instead, he knelt slightly, trying not to startle her. "You're shaking," he said softly. "Please let me call someone, or—" "No!" Elena's voice came out louder than she intended. "Please don't call anyone. I just need a minute. We'll go soon." The man's brows furrowed. He noticed the baby in her arms. The tiny hand, the pale face. "Is that your child?" She nodded. "Yes, his name's Liam." The man's throat tightened. He pulled off his gloves, reached into his pocket and pulled out a thermos. "It's just coffee," he said gently. "You can have it if you want something warm. It's clean." Elena hesitated, her pride battling her need. Then she saw Liam's lips trembling. She took the thermos slowly. "Thank you." As the steam rose into the night air, her hands trembled around the metal. The warmth felt unreal, like holding a piece of kindness. She took a sip, her dry throat burning a little from the heat. The man watched quietly. "Do you have somewhere to stay?" She avoided his gaze. "I was trying the shelter, but they're full." He nodded slowly, understanding the story she wasn't telling. "I see." He took off his thick overcoat and stepped closer. "Here," he said, placing it gently beside her on the bench. "You need this more than I do." I can't take that," she said quickly. "It's not a favor," he said quietly. "It's just what anyone should do." She hesitated again, then finally pulled the coat around herself and Liam. The moment the warmth touched her skin, her eyes filled with tears. No one had spoken to her kindly in days. No one had looked at her as human. The man extended his hand. "My name's Daniel. Daniel Carter, Elena," she replied softly. "Elena Brooks." He nodded, glancing at the baby. "He's beautiful." "How old?" 8 months. Daniel's lips twitched into a faint smile. "My wife used to say every baby carries a little miracle in them." Elena looked up. "Used to?" His eyes dimmed slightly. "She passed away 3 years ago. Cancer." Silence hung in the cold air. 2 broken souls, sitting on the same bench, connected by loss and loneliness. "I'm sorry," Elena whispered. Daniel shook his head. "I'm the one who's sorry. You shouldn't have to be out here. It's below freezing." She gave a weak laugh. "I've been worse. At least he's asleep." He looked at her again. The hollow eyes, the cracked lips, the fading light of hope. Something stirred deep inside him. The kind of feeling you get when life gives you a second chance to do something right. "Come with me," he said suddenly. She blinked. "What?" "There's a diner nearby. It's open all night. You both can warm up, have something to eat. No expectations, no questions." Elena bit her lip, suspicious yet desperate. "Why are you helping me?" Daniel met her eyes. "Because once someone helped me when I didn't deserve it. And now, I think it's my turn." For a long moment, the only sound was the wind. Then slowly, Elena nodded. He smiled softly. "All right, let's get you both out of the cold." He picked up his briefcase, and as they walked together under the falling snow, their footprints intertwined, a quiet symbol of fate at work. Neither of them knew it yet, but that small walk through the park would change the course of both their lives forever. The bell above the diner door jingled softly as they stepped inside. Warm air wrapped around them, carrying the comforting scent of coffee and pancakes. The contrast from the biting cold outside was almost too much to bear. Elena blinked rapidly, her frozen fingers tingling as life crept back into them. A waitress glanced up from behind the counter. Her expression softened when she saw Elena holding the baby. "Poor thing. Sit wherever you like, sweetheart," she said, motioning toward a booth near the heater. Daniel guided Elena to the seat, helping her slide in. Liam stirred in her arms, blinking at the light. His tiny cry echoed softly across the empty diner. "He's hungry," Elena said apologetically. "I don't have any—" "Don't worry," Daniel interrupted gently, already waving to the waitress. "Can we get a bowl of soup, a sandwich, and— Do you have warm milk for the baby?" "Of course, sir," the waitress replied with a kind smile. Elena looked down at the table, embarrassed. "You didn't have to—" Daniel shook his head. "No one should have to beg for warmth and food, especially not a mother." She fell silent, staring out the window at the snow still falling outside. The reflection of the streetlights shimmered in her tired eyes. When the food arrived, Elena hesitated before taking a bite. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. One taste of the hot soup, and tears instantly rolled down her cheeks. It wasn't just food, it was comfort, the first she'd felt in weeks. Daniel pretended not to notice her crying, focusing instead on unwrapping the milk bottle the waitress brought for Liam. He smiled softly. Looks like he's got quite the appetite, too. Elena nodded, her voice breaking. He hasn't had warm milk in, I don't even know how long. She fed Liam slowly, humming under her breath. The baby cooed, his tiny hands gripping her thumb. Daniel sat across from her, watching silently, something stirring deep in his chest. A mix of sorrow, admiration, and an unfamiliar sense of peace. After a long pause, he finally spoke. So, where are you from, Elena? She hesitated, then sighed. Originally from a small town outside the city. I moved here with my husband, Ethan. He worked construction. We didn't have much, but we were happy. Then, her voice trailed off. She swallowed hard. Then he had an accident at work. They said it was quick. He never came home. Daniel's jaw tightened. I'm so sorry, she shook her head. After that, everything fell apart. The bills, the rent. I thought I could handle it, but... She looked at Liam, her eyes glistening. I couldn't. I tried so hard to keep things together for him. Her words hung in the air like fragile glass. Daniel leaned forward, his elbows on the table. You've done more than most would. You're still standing, still fighting. That's not weakness, that's strength. Elena smiled faintly through her tears. You sound like you've seen your share of hard times, too. Daniel gave a small, hollow laugh. Yeah, my wife Claire. She used to run a charity for single mothers. She always said, when the world turns its back on you, kindness can be a lifeline. I didn't understand it then. Not until she was gone. Their eyes met. Two people broken by loss, finding unexpected solace in each other's company. For a brief moment, the world outside faded away. There was only the soft hum of the diner and the quiet rhythm of healing beginning to take shape. As the clock struck midnight, Daniel checked his watch and then looked at Elena. Listen, he said, choosing his words carefully. You can't go back out there tonight. It's too cold and the shelters are full. I'll manage, she said automatically, but even her voice didn't sound convinced. No, Daniel said firmly but kindly. I know a place, a women's shelter my wife used to volunteer at. They trust me there. You and Liam can stay for the night. I'll make a call. Elena stared at him in disbelief. You'd do that for us? You don't even know me, he smiled. Maybe I don't need to. Maybe knowing that you're someone's mother is enough. Her eyes filled again, and she pressed her lips together to hold back tears. Thank you, Daniel. Truly. I don't know how to repay. You don't owe me anything, he said gently. Just promise me you'll take the help. She nodded slowly. I promise. As they stood to leave, Daniel placed a few bills on the table. Liam was fast asleep again, his tiny head resting against his mother's chest. Elena looked down at him, then at Daniel, the stranger who'd become her miracle in one night. As they walked out into the snow again, Daniel held the door open, saying quietly, Come on, Elena, let's get you both somewhere warm. Tomorrow can be the start of something new. And for the first time in months, Elena dared to believe he might be right. The next morning, the city awoke under a thin layer of snow. Pale sunlight slipped through the clouds, touching the quiet street outside the St. Helena Women's Shelter, a small, old building that looked ordinary on the outside, but had witnessed countless stories of struggle and rebirth within its walls. Elena woke up in a clean bed for the first time in weeks. Liam was curled beside her, wrapped in a soft blanket, his tiny chest rising and falling with peace. The warmth, the safety. It felt unreal. For a few seconds, she simply stared at the ceiling, breathing in the smell of soap and breakfast from the hallway. Then she remembered. Daniel. He'd kept his word. He'd made the call, spoken to the shelter's director, and stayed until he knew she was safe. Before leaving, he'd handed her a card. Call me if you need anything. he'd said, and then disappeared into the snowy night. Later that morning, the shelter director, Mrs. Thompson, knocked softly on the door. "Good morning, dear. How's the little one?" Elena smiled. "Sleeping, finally. That's good." Mrs. Thompson placed a small tray on the bedside table, eggs, toast, and milk. "Mr. Carter called this morning. Said he wanted to check in and perhaps help you find a job." Elena blinked in surprise. "He did?" The older woman nodded with a warm smile. "Seems like you made quite the impression." 2 days later, Elena met Daniel again, this time in daylight, in the lobby of Carter & Kummer, the mid-sized financial firm where he worked. She wore borrowed clothes from the shelter and held Liam close in his carrier. Her heart raced. She'd never been in a place like this before. Daniel greeted her with the same calm kindness as that night in the park. "You made it," he said, smiling. She nodded. "I wanted to thank you again. For everything." "You already did," he replied. "Now let's see what we can do about getting you back on your feet." Daniel introduced her to Laura, the firm's HR manager, an older woman with kind eyes. "Daniel's told me about your situation," she said gently. "We have a part-time administrative assistant position open. Flexible hours. You'd be perfect for it." Elena's eyes widened. "Really? But I don't have experience." "You're a mother," Laura interrupted with a grin. "Trust me, you have more multitasking experience than half our staff." Everyone laughed softly, and for the first time in months, Elena smiled without forcing it. The following weeks were filled with small, quiet victories. Elena started working at Carter & Copeland's, answering phones, filing documents, learning to use computers again. She was shy at first, but her determination impressed everyone. Daniel would check in from time to time, sometimes bringing Liam a small toy or dropping off groceries at the shelter. Their conversations were light, but beneath every word lingered a deep, unspoken connection. One evening, after a long day at work, Elena found Daniel waiting in the lobby. "Big day?" he asked. She laughed softly. "You could say that. I made my first report today. Didn't even crash the computer," he chuckled. "That's better than I did my first month here." They walked outside together, the city glowing in twilight. Elena glanced at him, her voice low. "You know, I used to think people only helped when they wanted something in return, but you've never asked for anything." Daniel looked away for a moment, his jaw tightening. "Maybe I'm just trying to honor the kind of person my wife was." "Claire always believed kindness keeps the world from falling apart." Elena smiled. "Then she must have been an incredible woman." "She was," he said softly. "But I think she'd like to know someone like you's carrying her spirit forward." For a while, they just stood there, the silence filled with gratitude and something tender neither dared to name. Months passed. Elena found a small apartment through the shelter's program. Liam learned to crawl, then walk. Daniel continued to be there, sometimes as a mentor, sometimes as a friend, and always as the man who had reminded her that hope still existed. One afternoon, she stopped by his office to deliver a few files. Liam toddled beside her, giggling. Daniel bent down and smiled. "Hey, little man." Liam's small hands reached up, and Daniel picked him up without hesitation. The little boy laughed, resting his head on Daniel's shoulder. Elena watched, her heart swelling. It wasn't love in the romantic sense, not yet. It was something purer. "Trust. Thank you," she whispered. "For everything. You saved not just me, but his future too." Daniel shook his head gently. "No, Elena, you saved yourself. I just reminded you what you were capable of." That night, as Elena tucked Liam into bed, she looked out the window at the city lights. Her world was still fragile, but it was glowing again. One small light at a time. And somewhere in another apartment across town, Daniel sat by his window too. Thinking about the young mother whose courage had reignited something inside him he thought he'd lost forever. 2 years later. The city park looked different now. Brighter. Greener. Alive with laughter and the soft buzz of summer. Children ran between the trees, chasing bubbles and dreams. while a young woman sat on a bench nearby, smiling at the world she once thought she'd never belong to again. It was Elena. But she wasn't the same woman who had once shivered on that bench with her baby in her arms. Now, she wore a neat blouse, her hair tied back in a bun, a staff badge from Carter & Kober clipped proudly to her chest. Her eyes sparkled with quiet confidence, the kind that only comes from surviving the storm and finding the sun again. Beside her, Liam, now a bright and curious toddler, was giggling as he fed pigeons from a paper bag. His laughter echoed through the park, pure and contagious. Elena's heart swelled as she watched him. Every smile, every laugh was a reminder of how far they had come, from a frozen park bench to a life full of warmth. At that moment, a familiar voice called out behind her. "Still feeding the pigeons, huh? I thought we agreed they're the city's most spoiled citizens." Elena turned, grinning as Daniel walked toward her, holding 2 cups of coffee. He looked just as he always did, calm, kind, a trace of humor in his eyes. Only now, his smile seemed lighter, more at peace. She laughed. "Some habits die hard." He handed her a cup. "Well, I can't complain. You're the reason I started coming back to this park." Elena sipped her coffee, the warm breeze brushing her face. Hard to believe it's been 2 years since that night. Daniel nodded, his expression softening. "I remember. I almost walked right past you, you know. I was too tired to care about anyone that evening." She looked at him. "But you didn't," he smiled faintly. "No. I guess fate doesn't let us walk past the people we're meant to meet." They sat in silence for a while, watching Liam play. Elena finally spoke. "You know, I started volunteering at St. Helena's, the same shelter where you took me that night." Daniel turned to her, surprised but proud. "You did?" She nodded. "Every Saturday. I talk to the new mothers there, help them with resumes, interview clothes, childcare. Sometimes I just sit with them and listen. Most of them just need someone to believe they can make it." Daniel's eyes softened. "Claire would have loved that." Elena smiled gently. "I think she's the reason I keep doing it. You once said kindness keeps the world from falling apart. I didn't understand that until now. I think it's how we heal. By passing it forward." Daniel looked at her for a long moment, then said quietly, "You've done more than I ever could, Elena. You turned pain into purpose." "That's rare," she blushed lightly, brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. "Maybe, but it started with you," he chuckled. "All I did was buy coffee and lend a coat." She shook her head. "No, you gave me something no one else did, and belief. You looked at me and saw a person, not a problem." Their eyes met, a silent exchange of gratitude that words could never fully hold. Just then, Liam came running toward them, his cheeks rosy, his small hand clutching a dandelion. "Mommy, look, a wish flower," he said excitedly. Elena knelt down, smiling. "What do we do when we find one?" Liam squeezed his eyes shut, blew the seeds into the air and whispered, "I wish everyone gets someone kind like Mr. Daniel." The seeds floated up, catching the sunlight, tiny stars drifting toward the sky. Elena looked up at Daniel, tears glistening in her eyes. "Looks like your legacy's already working." He laughed softly, though his voice trembled. "Guess I'll take that as a compliment." As the sun began to set, painting the park in gold, Daniel stood and offered her his hand. "Come on, let's get some ice cream before this one wishes for the whole world next." Elena took his hand, standing beside him. "Maybe that wouldn't be such a bad thing," she said with a smile, and as they walked away, a man, a woman, and a child. Their silhouettes merged against the orange glow of the evening. To any passerby, they might have looked like just another small family enjoying a summer evening. But for those who believed in miracles, it was something more. Proof that a single act of kindness could rewrite destiny.